John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today we're reading Hellblazer number 39. And just a little recap on what's been going on. John Constantine and his friends Marge and Mercury are back together. And they've been traveling in the English countryside on a whim because Mercury had an idea that someone was needing her help. And it turns out she was right because there was a boy named Martin whose dad was abusing him. And Mercury was able to save Martin and his mother and get them away from the father. And they took Martin and his mom with them on their trip. And now they're heading off to their next destination. So first things first, with the cover here of issue 39. And this cover is pretty interesting. It's very weird and eye-catching. There are two naked men in fetal positions that are fighting with each other. And the cover is actually split in half and mirrored. So the top half of it is the normal right side up version. And then the lower half of it is an upside down version of the same cover. And that includes like the DC logo and the title and everything. So it's a very cool, interesting concept that I don't think I've ever seen before. And we also see that this issue is written by Jamie Delano with art by Steve Pugh. And we start off with Marge, and she's talking about how it's autumn now, and she's sitting in a graveyard atop some cliffs that are overlooking the ocean. And the narration says, "Autumn, a poignant fading glow, the sweet sharpness as earth draws beauty back inside herself to nurture it through winter's chill. This is the time to shelter and conserve, to stay at home close and warm with a small family of friends and lovers, patiently hopeful of the spring." And on the ground in front of her, she's drawing like a mystical symbol. It kind of looks like the Star of David in a circle. And she's talking about how they've joined up with some of the people from the Pagan Nation from the Fear Machine story arc. And this is kind of like the small group of family and friends and lovers that the narration was alluding to in the last panel. So the people who are together here are Zed, Marge, Mercury, Errol, Martin, and of course, John. So that mystical symbol that she's drawing with 6 points is supposed to represent each person, and she says that it's a good foundation to build a future on. But she's unsure about John and whether he intends to stay or not. So she kind of redraws the symbol with 5 points, and that symbol apparently is a little bit more ominous and not so happy. And it turns out that John is actually napping in the same field that she's in, just a little bit away. So she sees him and she throws an acorn to wake him up, and she tells him, let's get moving because this place is kind of spooky, because it's an old abandoned graveyard with a church that's been hit by lightning. And we see the name of this issue is called The Hanged Man. So as John gets up from his nap, he says, "Christ, I feel like an old man." And Marge suggested they go down to the water to warm up on the beach, and he says no to that, but they continue to walk and talk a bit. And Marge just straight up asks him, "Do you like it here? Are you going to stay with us this time?" And he doesn't really answer it. He just says, "Why did Zed have to pick this place for the new camp? It's got such a bloody weird feel to it. That church, the beach, you, me, Zed, and all the others, it's all so sickeningly familiar. Everything just goes round and round, and I never quite get the point." And then Marge says to him, "You had nightmares again last night. What were you dreaming about?" And John says, "Just the same old shit. Floods, drowning, suffocating softness, entanglement, nothing clear or visual. Writhing snakes, a terrible joy. What do you think?" And he's asking her because she is kind of psychic. She's definitely used tarot cards to see his future in the past and to kind of divinate what's going to happen to them. So she says, "Well, flood sounds like a fear of the subconscious. Snakes are female symbols too. Looks like your sexuality's hanging you up. Poor John, I think you feel trapped in a swamp of femininity, wanting and resenting at the same time. I think you're going to run away again." And by this time, they've walked all the way down from the cliffs and are now on the beach.
And Marge walks away from him and goes to sit on a rock. And he says in answering to her last comments, yeah, I know. That's what I always do. But I'm not sure I can afford the luxury anymore. On one level, you're right about the dreams. I am hung up on that stuff, but they all feel more literal than symbolic, as if I was fighting myself. And then he goes over to where she was sitting and sits down by her. And she turns around and gives him a big hug and says, everything would be all right if you just let us love you. But then John kind of shrugs her off and stands up and says, I daren't, Marge. I'll spoil it. It's too late. I've wasted my time. I'm too bloody lazy and weak. And Marge is kind of mad at this and says, I've heard it all before and it's crap, John. You're strong. You have love and compassion. I've felt them from you. We all have. And then he turns around and says to her, Marge, I know how to go through the motions, but I'm hollow, a fraud. I'm only half a man. And as Marge is answering him, saying that that's enough for her, all of a sudden John sees something behind her. And what he sees is something that startles him, but it seems like it's kind of familiar. It's a boy that has like no features or sex organs or anything. And it's standing there right behind Marge on some rocks, and it's beckoning John towards it. And as John sees it, he says, the golden boy, as if he's seen this thing before. And then the golden boy takes off and starts jumping on the rocks farther away from John, and he tries to chase after it, but it's no use. And when John gets to the top of the rocks, the golden boy is gone. And John drops to his knees and starts crying. And Marge says, what's the matter, love? Why are you crying? And John answers, he went into the rocks. I couldn't keep up. It was the golden boy again. Didn't you see him? He was so beautiful. And Marge didn't see anything, so she just kind of sits by him and she asks who the golden boy is. And John says, I was never sure. I used to see him sometimes when I was a kid, usually when I was feeling down. Some sort of imaginary friend, I suppose. Only he'd never be my friend, no matter how much I wanted him to be. The first time I saw him, I was 4 or 5 with my dad, visiting Mom's grave. The old bastard never said I'd killed her, but I always knew that's what he felt. And then we get a couple panels of a flashback of John as a young boy with his dad in the cemetery as his dad is talking to his mom's grave. And John continues, I was a sickly little sod, always dressed in shabby clothes. Sneaky looking, the neighborhood mother said, always getting the blame for everything. And as 5-year-old John is looking at the gravestones, he sees the golden boy come out from behind them, and he says, when he stepped out from behind the cross, he was so shiny and beautiful that I thought he must be Jesus. All I wanted was to be close to him. Somehow I knew that if only I could soak up a little of his strength, his cleanliness, it would make my father love me. And we see 5-year-old John walk over to the golden boy, and they just stare at each other face to face. And John continues, he looked at me and smiled. I loved him, but I hated him as well. The contrast was too great. I felt like shit. I wanted to smear his perfection. And he looked right into me and knew it. His smile became a cold, reflective sneer. He moved his arm and banished me forever. And 5-year-old John is super upset by this, so he begins screaming and yelling, and his dad actually comes over and hits him for being disrespectful to the dead. And then we cut to like a teenage John, and he's in prep school, and he's staring at some of the popular kids, and he says, I caught glimpses of him in the kids at school from time to time, always being the things that they wouldn't let me be. Athlete, choir boy, perfect. The world was so easy for him. I had no choice but to despise him. He was a complete wanker, but my father loved him and I was jealous as hell. And this is interesting because there is no actual golden boy that anyone else sees. So he's talking about the idea of like a perfect child or being the type of kid that would make your parents proud. And it's not just us. Marge is confused by this concept as well. She says, how could your father love him? You were his son and this golden boy wasn't even real. And John, who instantly looks kind of guilty and sad, says, no, but he could have been if I let him. And Marge thinks he's talking crazy, but John says, it's this sodden place. There's something building here, something that's got me dead centered in its sights. And Marge suggests possibly it's the weather and the changing of the seasons making him restless, but John says, nah, it's much more than that. There's something crucial about here and now, everything significant. And all of a sudden it begins to start pouring rain. Like literally the weather just changes from sunny and bright and nice to a complete downpour. So they eventually decide to walk back to camp where the rest of their friends are. And as they're walking, John says, did you ever see a tied up dog circle around its pole until it ran out of rope? That's how it feels, as if this is the center of my spiral. as if this might be my last chance to grab some grail, to learn some magic secret that will make sense of all this confusion. And then Marge turns to him and puts her hand on his face, and John looks into her eyes and says, 10 to 1 I screw it up. I should have done more preparation, but then we always think there's more time than there is. And Marge says that she'll help, but John rejects her, saying, not this time, Marge. There's magic shit to do and only Zed can help with that. Take care now, love. And he gives her a kiss, and he walks away from her, leaving her in the rain. And once he's out of earshot, she turns towards him and says, yeah, you too, you hopeless bastard. You too. So it seems with that John has totally rejected any relationship with Marge in the future. So John finally gets back to the little town that they're staying in. And Errol tries to say hi to John, but John doesn't even acknowledge him and just walks straight by and heads over to Zed's room. And as Errol is talking to himself about how moody John is, Marge shows up and asks him how the kids are doing. And we get to see that Martin and Mercury are hitting it off. They're becoming fast friends and possibly more than that. So Errol takes Marge over to them, and it turns out that they're in this barn where they are helping some sheep who are giving birth. And they all seem pretty happy, which is nice to see for a change. And Mercury asks where John's at. And then we cut to the inside of Zed's room, which kind of looks like a hut or something that they put up. And Zed is looking just like she did when she was in the Pagan Nation during the Fear Machine story arc. She has a shaved head, and she's wearing a bunch of interesting earrings and jewelry. And she's kneeling in front of a fire in the center of her hut. And as John walks in, she says, where were you? I was expecting you earlier. And if you remember from like the first story arc of Hellblazer and even the Fear Machine, Zed is definitely a very powerful psychic and was chosen by a weird cult to be the second coming of Mary, who would give birth to the second coming of Jesus. So she definitely has some extra supernatural powers going on. So that is essentially why John is here. He says to her, I think there's something I should know. What's happening here? I know it's crucial, but apart from that, I'm in the dark. I need your help, Zed. So he kneels down beside her, and she pulls out her tarot cards, and she picks 3 and lays them down in front of John, and he needs to pick them out himself, which will establish the order of events to happen. So he picks up the first one and flips it over, and it is a picture of the hanged man upside down, and she says, the first is who you are. And then he flips the second one, and it's a card that says the towers, and Zed says, the second is in between. And then he flips the third final card, and it is a picture of the Magus. And Zed says, and the third is who you want to be. And then Zed goes up behind John and covers his eyes, and she says to him, look inward, John. There's a place in you where 2 half-truths intersect to make a whole. Reconcile the opposites of horror and love, and thus encompass chaos with magic. Now open your eyes and study the first card. Let its imagery soak into your mind until it finds its match in the personal cross of contradiction which you're crucified on. And once again, I believe I've said this before when like Marge was reading tarot cards. I don't know what these mean necessarily. I'm not steeped in magic, but you know, Google's out there if you want to check out what those cards mean, and maybe it'll give you more insight to this section. But John begins to stare at the card, and the narration says, drowning, always drowning, weightlessly sucked down, breathlessly squeezed by the deep liquid blackness of this primal river Styx, entangled, constricted, kicking and clawing, airlessly screaming, a choking taste of blood. Now form, sensation, pain, an ankle snagged, a body jerked, snatched from oblivion. And what we're seeing on the page is he's going into some sort of trance where he's sinking deeper into a vision where he goes back in time to the moment of his own birth. So we're seeing a bloody baby being pulled out of a womb, and this baby looks pretty small. He's being pulled out by his foot, and the doctor's holding him upside down, and he says, hardly seems possible, but it's breathing. Get it in an incubator now. It's at least 40% underweight. And then as the doctor's handing baby John off to a nurse, he checks on the mother and says, we've lost her, I'm afraid. She's a bloody mess inside, and, oh no, there's another one in here. But as the doctor takes a closer look, he says, no hope, though. Ruptured placenta. The hemorrhaging killed them both. And then one of the nurses remarks, it's full grown, too. The other one's sickly in comparison. What a shame. It would have been a lovely kid. And then the doctor answers her, so much for natural selection. Life plays some cruel tricks. Where's the father? So they go out to the waiting room and they tell John's dad what happened, that it was twins and that one of them didn't make it and the mother also died. So they tell him to go see the one child who is okay. And when he goes into the incubating room, he looks at the baby and says, that's not mine. Take it away. There's been a mistake. Where's my baby? Where's my wife? I don't want it. It's ugly. It's evil. And I gotta say, he's not wrong. The way that they draw this baby, it is not a very attractive looking baby. So the nurses try to calm the dad down and they say, it'll take time, but you'll grow to love him. And that it's just an innocent little baby. But the dad yells back at them, I'll never love him. It's a killer. Put a pillow over its head. And he's like yelling this right into the baby's face. So it's not very nice to the newborn. So a doctor comes over and escorts John's dad out of the room. And a nurse walks over to baby John and says, welcome to the world, you poor little sod. And with that, John snaps back into reality and he's once again inside of Zed's tent or hut or whatever you call this thing. And he looks over and he sees a shadow of himself and he begins talking to it and he says, twins, split cell, split personality, divided self. Shit. There should have been two of me, but you killed him. You killed your brother, just like Mercury told you. And then John yells, no! And he pulls the curtain aside where the shadow was, and he sees that the storm is getting worse, and now there's lightning, and it's crashing around the church from before. And then it seems like John is shocked and taken aback by this realization, and he brings his hands up to his face, and he begins holding it, and he says, yes, it's the truth. It's incontrovertible. You know it is. You killed him. Murdered him in your dead mother's womb. You killed the golden boy, the magus, killed the best part of yourself. You're guilty as sin, condemned and hanged for it, over and over again. And then he walks back over to the cards on the ground and he picks up the hangman and he throws it in the fire. So this is some pretty big revelations about John. I mean, this is basically saying that John was never supposed to be the magus or this great magician. It was supposed to be his brother who was the chosen one, but he killed his brother in the womb and took that birthright. And that's why all this bad stuff keeps happening in his life over and over again. So with this new knowledge, John asks Errol to go with him to the beach and to bring some magic mushrooms. And John is going back to that rocky area where he saw the golden boy earlier in the day. And as he's walking, the narration says, all these years I never knew. I built a dark fortress to defend and hide my guilty life and crouched inside alone. A shadow separated from the light that cast it. That terror, that sickly dread. It wasn't death I trembled waiting for, but this inevitable bolt of revelation to split me open and bring me tumbling down. It feels like this is it, all right. The final chance. The tower stands between the hangman and the magus. And in the panel of this last narration, we see the burned church that's on top of the hill next to the beach. So John is taking it as a sign that that church is the tower from the tarot card. So he tells Errol to give him the mushrooms and he takes the entire bag and eats it. And Errol's a little worried because the last time him and John did any kind of psychedelics, John freaked out. John doesn't really do well with psychedelics in general. And Errol is kind of worried about this and he tells John that. And John just basically says, it's fine. I know what I'm doing. I'll see you later. And then John takes off running on the rocks just like the golden boy was earlier. But this time the rocks don't end where they did before. Now when he gets to the edge of the rocks, there's like a giant kind of stone statue that looks like a woman who has large breasts and her legs are spread open and there's definitely a cave in between them. And yes, this cave opening definitely looks like a vagina. And as John approaches the entrance, the narration says, come on, you know the way. You've been here time after time. And there's that inner light to guide you, that warm fraternal glow. So it seems that he can actually feel his brother's spirit calling to him inside of this stone woman's womb. And then we get a panel of all these crazy colors and shapes, and it definitely seems like the mushrooms are now hitting John to full effect as he enters the cave. And he starts to freak out like he normally does, but then he is able to get control of himself, and the narration says, no, don't resist, don't fight. That's what you always do. Accept it. Ritual or drug, what's the difference? Just a means to an end or a beginning. And he doesn't quite fully go into the cave. He just stands there at the entrance. And it seems like there's maybe two eyes looking at him in the darkness. And the narration says, what's the matter? Can't look your mother in the face? Believe it and it's true. This is the womb, the source of all magic, the center of the spiral. And with that, John actually walks into the cave. And there's like a really, really tight, narrow passage as he's going in. And he almost gets stuck and he begins to freak out again. But then he decides to take off his clothes, which will help him squeeze through. And once he's through that narrow opening, the cave opens up into a wide area with a big pool. So he jumps in and begins to swim. And the narration says, he's waiting for you. So take the plunge. Push on through. Nothing to lose that you haven't lost before. Just a sanctuary to regain, a vital harmony to restore. And towards the back of the cave where he's swimming towards, there is a bright light that begins to form. And then all of a sudden, I believe this is John in a vision, but I could be wrong. This might actually really be happening. John is now the baby version of himself, and he's swimming in the womb towards his golden brother. And the John baby is super deformed and messed up. And of course, the golden child is perfect. And the narration says, "A flood of recognition washes the loneliness away. The prodigal has returned." And as John swims towards his brother, the narration continues, "He's so bright, so warm, so strong and calm, drifting serene in amniotic space. His face a sun too fierce to look upon. Beautiful, beautiful golden boy, remember me. Touch me, heal me, make me whole." And as baby John reaches out to touch his golden brother, something's wrong, and the narration says, "But it burns. Your light exposes my inadequacy, complements my darkness unbearably. It riddles me. Your love devours me, shrivels me. It makes me ugly and raw, bitter with poison truth of jealousy. That twisted, cruel instinct that whines incessantly. In any world that nurtures you, there'll be no room for me." So baby John, who was reaching out to touch the face of his brother, decides to grab the umbilical cord of his brother instead, and he begins to squeeze it and twist it and tie it up into knots. And the narration continues, "I am the sun eclipsed, unless I dim his light and fight for my right to shine. No, no, no. To kill your brother is to kill yourself. That was the way it was before. Lives wasted endlessly. It must be different this time around." So baby John takes the knots that he just made and undoes them, and he lets go of the umbilical cord, and he lets his brother go. And the narration continues, "Don't fight back, surrender, lie back, let go. Bestow this gift, give him his chance to grow. Greater love hath no man, don't they say? So while he flourishes, bask in reflected glory. Accept this piece of righteousness, fade into the forgiveness of this silently submissive dark." And what we're seeing is the golden child, the brother of John, is now freed, and he is saved by John, and his body begins to float away and into this bright light, which fades away and leaves John in the darkness. And then we cut to the beach outside, where it is now morning, and Errol is looking for John. He can't find him, and he eventually stumbles upon the entrance to the cave, which does not look the same anymore. There's no stone woman. It just looks like a normal cave entrance. And he starts to worry more as he goes in, because he doesn't hear anything from John as he's calling out, and he sees that John has left all his clothes about, and also it's very, very cold in here. And as he follows John's footprints in the sand, they eventually lead Errol to the pool that's inside the cave. And when Errol sees this, he says, "Oh, bullocks. Okay, you win. You've done it. I'm freaked out. Now where the hell are you, Constantine?" And that is the end of the issue. And I believe I've said it before, but this is the second to the last issue of the Jamie Delano run of Hellblazer. So the next one will definitely wrap up this story arc, and then we begin the very awesome run by Garth Ennis, which I can't wait for because I haven't read that for a really long time, so it'll be super fun to go through. So if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.